The Puzzle Jug, Chapter 4, The House with a Name. This boy had caught it sure as shooting. Every eye of every man around the pit was fixed on Hannibal. Finally, James broke the spell. He grabbed a hold of their runaway astonishment so they could move into the next phase of the ceremony.
What brings you up here to the pit, son?
Hannibal blinked himself back to the present. He fumbled to unwrap the leather strings of the bag of herbs from around his neck. Finally managing to untangle the soaking bundle, he offered it up to his uncle. James gently grasped the bag from his surprisingly steady open palms. He let the bag dangle and drip, suspended from his 2 fingers by its drawstrings. Then he cackled,
Reckon you done saved us a step, sir. This Efo Tay already been baptized and sanctified in branch water.
As his uncle swung the drenched bag back and forth in front of the boy's eyes, he broke into the snorting laugh for which he was famous. Immediately, the tremendous weight of this otherworldly wizardry Hannibal had lugged all the way up the hill from the swamp village to the pit drained out of him like warm milk from a cracked jug. James passed the bag around to the other men. The younger ones cautiously left their stations by the pit, eager to take a turn holding the seldom-seen bag and its contents. Each in their turn pulled out a pinch of what had been reduced to a soggy, gray, tobacco-like mass. They sniffed it, held it up to the sunlight and inspected its condition, but Hannibal couldn't hear what they said. Then they murmured to each other. Ned placed a hand on Hannibal's shoulder, motioning with his head for the boy to follow him over to the edge of the hog-cooking pit.
You can't wake up no spirits less'n you fire up the wood of the Blackjack's oak. That the tree we standing under right now. Blackjack himself done long crossed over to the land of the spirits. But we has to remember his teachings in today. He showed us how to steep the hunger to be independent into the hog meat. He in our midst every day, 'cause we name at least one fella Jack in each generation, so we won't forget what he say to us. Blackjack say when you take these leaves from Africa and you mix them all up with the holy water from Storm Branch Creek.
James abruptly halted the sermon for his flock by turning his eyes toward Hannibal.
Wait a minute. You did stop by the church on your way up here, didn't you?
The boy was still hugging the sopping leather water bag hanging around his neck.
You ain't trying to fool us with some well water, are you?
He had forgotten it, as if it had become another appendage, like an arm or a hand. Caleb pointed his long barbecue spear towards the bag to rouse Hannibal from his stupor. Disentangling a drawstring from one of his ears, Hannibal's knees finally made good on their promise to buckle at some point along his journey. They hit the ground hard, but he still cradled the water bag, despite the collapse. James bent to help him as a shock of reverence shook him. Laying his hand on the wet leather, the songs of 1,000 souls on both sides of the veil embraced him. The salt sweat and sorrows were the very waters of Storm Branch Creek. It had washed over their shredded fingers, torn by the cotton boll. It had cooled the welts on their backs and legs, delivered by the lash. It had calmed the tears they'd shed from the separation of their kin in childbirth and in accident, singing a chorus of endurance and survival. Now the tears did flow from his own eyes. A full decade had come and gone since a boy caught it as profoundly as this child in front of him.
Hope nor human don't get birthed, unless the roots beckons it hither.
Granny Venus had raised up every man present at this Independence Day ceremony on that proverb. This dirt on which they stood had been trodden and packed by countless footfalls. It was the material evidence of the unfree people who'd prepared feasts for some master's pleasure. Many of those souls who'd excavated this crater possessed backs and arms that bore the scars of bondage, yet they bowed their heads and managed insincere grins. This was holy ground and was intended for a purpose the fluffy partygoers never could have imagined. The pit was a well-structured indentation in the earth measuring a full 20 feet from end to end. It spread 5 feet wide and at least 3 feet deep. The planed logs lay parallel to the incision in the ground, supporting sturdy wooden poles upon which the pork sides rested. The carefully tended blackjack oak coals steadily roasted the meat, glowing like 1,000 flaming moons whenever the occasional breeze blew across them. Old Joe had crossed over from Sumption only 2 months ago. He'd been the only summoner James had ever known since he himself had caught the Liberty 41 years ago today. Now James was the summoner. He stepped into Old Joe's place and felt his spirit was close. It was the first time he'd invoked the ancestors to gather around them. This was the true moment of sanctification when the independence ceremony began. James emptied the smaller bag's gooey contents into a soup-sized wooden bowl that was stained with the evidence of many ceremonies that had been held before today. Gripping the neck of the bag, as his summoner had taught him, he allowed the storm branch water to trickle over the greenish-brown pile of effotate. Then Jack produced a gray stone pestle to crush them until the water and herbs merged into one liquid element. When the blending was complete, James gave voice to the summoner's decree for the first time while he poured the mixture from the bowl onto the coals with each declaration.
Fawod hodie ene obre na enam.
Each man standing beside the pit began to lift the spear-like barbecue sticks they held and pound them on the ground. The sound became a heartbeat, with a rhythm like the cadence of a strangely muted drum.
We are free men.
James continued his invocation to the gathering ghosts.
We are independent men. We live as one of all we behold. This is the promise of our fathers and our mothers. We are free men.
Clouds of steam infused with a scent Hannibal had no name for. It rose into the air as each old and young man inhaled the droplets of the ineffable. It was a merging of a past and a future that entered into their skin, their blood, and fused with their bones. Hannibal held his breath until his Uncle Jack whispered, "Don't hold it in till you pass out there, man." The boy released the trapped air with a long sigh. Jack winked towards him as Ned approached and, bending down to Hannibal's eye level, slipped a smooth black object into the child's hand.
Now, you take this on over there to Massa Thomas at the White House, and don't tarry none.
Uncertainty flickered in Hannibal's eyes. His uncles hadn't told him about this part of the ceremony. Or maybe they had, and he'd forgotten it in the midst of the ritual.
You'll do just fine, son. The Massa expecting you.
Hannibal closed his hand around the puzzling object. Taking a last, brief look at the whole group of men staring down at him, he managed to arrange his feet under him enough to continue this next part of his mission. Ahead of him, a sea of celebrants bubbled up on the lawn in front of the big house with a name. A vignette of red roses. Their beauty halted in full bloom were intertwined with white daisies and fastened to a royal blue bunting. Hannibal wove his way through the picnic guests, still uncertain of his destination. From the columned porch, 2 house servants dressed in starched white aprons were making gestures to him. He knew them from church. One was named Anne, and the taller one was Junie. They pointed with a great deal of fervor toward a raised platform upon which the plantation owner, Thomas Lamar, stood facing the crowd of party people.
May I have your attention, please?
The sporadic laughter and uneven murmurs started to quiet.
Sarah and I couldn't be in a happier state of mind this afternoon than to share our home with all of you, our friends and fellow farmers. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate an auspicious moment in our destiny.
Thomas paused briefly as his eyes scanned the faces before him. He wanted to invite his wife up onto the stage with him, but he didn't see Sarah anywhere. So he found his place in his speech and continued.
80 years ago, our American nation was born.
Hannibal inched his way towards the back of the platform as Anne and Junie's hand lifted, and her fingers pointed in cadence with the affirmative nodding of their heads. Anne finally raised her palm, indicating he'd reached the spot where he should stop to wait for Massa Thomas.
Good afternoon to Mr. and Mrs. Pickens over there by the Punch Bowl. And we're also honored to have Senator Hammond celebrating with us today, accompanied by his lovely wife, Catherine.
A gentleman accepted the recognition of their presence as their wives demurred.
I'm going to officially kick off the festivities by inviting one of our dearest community members up here to lead us in a prayer of thanks for our many blessings before we eat. He's a gentleman who's more than proved that we don't need to drag our cotton all the way up north. A visionary who imagines a future where South Carolina stands on its own, supplying the nation with our own goods manufactured in our own mills. His dream for us all is not just about profits, though. He demonstrates the sovereignty of the South, and his efforts are making our economy stronger. His majestic Graniteville mills are a wonderful example of our industrial future.
Sporadic applause erupted as bonneted heads and leghorn hats pivoted towards a middle-aged man standing in the center of the crowd.
William Gregg, if you'd be so kind, we'd be honored if you would lead us in a word of thanks for our bountiful mercies on this fine Independence Day.
Mr. Gregg, dressed in a starched white shirt that looked too hot for the day, nodded toward Thomas. The partygoers opened up a path for him to make his way to the decorated dais as Thomas held out a hand to assist Mr. Gregg up. It was just as he got his guest speakers situated that he caught sight of the stoic child peering up at him from the rear of the platform. Hannibal lingered, half in shadow and half out. Thomas nodded towards the boy and raised a finger to let him know that he should stay put right where he stood.
Well, Thomas, I'm humbled to stand up here with you and with so many of our neighbors on the anniversary of this monumental day. We're paying homage to the founding of our nation, a country in which our ancestors fervently believed their progeny would overcome oppression, and we surely have.
This time, the applause from the crowd was more earnest and far louder.
God has seen fit for our ventures to prosper. He has bestowed upon us a bountiful land for us to till that bears crops which clothe our people both here and abroad. He graciously supplies our families with all our needs.
Mr. Gregg was speaking to no one in particular, but waved his hand over the imagined landscape from Edgefield to Silver Bluff. He'd effectively shrunk the entire countryside into a miniature model to accommodate his purposes in his speech. Mr. Gregg stopped to survey the upturned faces, his mouth creasing a bit at the corners. Thomas was satisfied that Gregg would keep the audience's attention for a few minutes, so he quietly descended the steps towards the back of the platform where Hannibal waited for him. When he squeezed past the guest, he saw that the overheated boy looked like a cut-out paper doll glued over an illustration in a storybook. Hannibal's eyes were wide. Thomas saw he was confused and overwhelmed with the situation. He approached Hannibal carefully, holding out his open palm and bending down to his eye level until he reached the spot where the boy stood. Mr. Gregg interrupted his speech with a small apology.
It's a bit early for me to be stumping for my campaign as the next candidate for Edgefield County Representative, so please don't confuse my sincerity as one of those canned political speeches.
Almost half of the people gathered responded with a light, non-committal chuckle.
I mean it when I say there are more mercies inhabiting our lives here than punishments. It's quite astonishing, to be frank. When one studies the arc of history, we live in a golden era charged with opportunities for prosperity and prospects for expansion. Let us take this opportunity, here while we're all together, to reflect on one or two encouraging aspects in which we can show gratitude. Let's quietly offer a thank you as we acknowledge the sacrifices made in our name by our forefathers, so we might enjoy these rewards today.
The head dressings on the crowd below Mr. Gregg initially all pointed toward the ground in reverence, slowly became as animated as kingfishers diving for sticklebacks. Under the dais, Thomas smiled broadly at Hannibal, hoping he could alleviate some of the boy's anxiety.
So it's you this year, young fella. I expect congratulations are in order.
Hannibal raised a closed fist towards the man he vaguely recognized. He had seen him before, but not in quite a while. In return, Thomas grasped the small, sweaty, balled-up hand between both of his, shaking it gently. Hannibal opened his fist, depositing the item inside Thomas's hands. Thomas examined it, positioning the sharpened flint piece between his thumb and index finger.
A fella named of Minko Choba gave this arrowhead point to my great-great-grandfather more than 100 years ago over at Golfin's trading post.
He moved it close to Hannibal's face, and for the first time, the boy got a good look at the object he'd held so tightly it practically drew blood.
He was an Indian chief. He lived on this very land here where you and me are standing right now. A Chickasaw man he was.
Thomas opened his other palm and let the arrowhead rest in it. Hannibal couldn't tear his gaze away.
That Chickasaw man gave this point to my grandpapa. His name was the same as mine, Thomas Lamar. It was given as what they call a token to keep the peace between them.
Not a bit of this story was helping Hannibal understand anything that had transpired for this whole day. In fact, it was messing up his mind even further.
But I can't possibly accept this fine token from you.
Thomas's face was solemn. An ache of disappointment worked its way up Hannibal's throat as his bewilderment increased. The damnable fire ants resumed their march, and he blinked hard to keep the water that was rising contained under his eyelids. Thomas reached in his vest pocket and hurried up his explanation to ease the tension in the boy's face.
See, I can't take it unless I give you something back in return.
He produced a mottled silver-gray piece of metal upon which were embossed letters all around the outside edge. The only part of it Hannibal could really make out was where arrows were gathered up in a bunch and held together by something or other.
And here's what my grandpapa Thomas gave the Indian king in trade. It's a Spanish dollar. This is my part of the trade. It's for you to take back to your uncles at the pit.
The boy stared at it. He stood still, but made no gesture to take it from Massa Thomas, even though it was apparently the next step in the independence. Thomas smiled again, pushed the coin into Hannibal's hand, and headed back up to the platform. Anne came forward to clasp the boy's shoulder. Then she led him back towards the porch as he heard the voice of Massa Thomas announce that the main course was now being delivered to the serving table.
Lunch is served, everyone.
Looking past Anne's arm, Hannibal saw the same young men from the pit. Only a half hour before, they'd been clad in hide skirts as the blackjack oak wood, the herb, and the holy water was sprinkled on the coals. Now they were dressed as they usually were. They wore their homespun long breeches and serving shirts. Between them, they carried the long, flat boards piled high with steaming hog meat that had been separated from the bones.